there I am forgetting to change the overlay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Annette Richmond. This is Content Marketing School, and I'm so excited to be here with Marion, who I've chatted with before. He's such an awesome guy, and I absolutely love this topic. And we were talking before we went live. We actually met on Clubhouse, whereas most of the people I know now from LinkedIn, I met on
Yeah.
Clubhouse, and it was really, really wonderful from that. And I got to know you on LinkedIn and had you on my previous career and business show and podcast. But for anyone who doesn't know you and what you do, please tell us. I know you have kind of a fairly recent new venture.
Yeah, great thing, and Annette, it's a pleasure to be back on your show, and that circle that of contacts and tribe that we've created from those early days on Clubhouse. It seems like it was 100 years ago, but really just a few years ago. We've stayed connected, and it's great to be able to support each other here on the LinkedIn platform. My name is Marion Spears Karr, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm somewhat of a serial entrepreneur and executive recruiter who specializes in the healthcare space. I just founded my next company called Inflow Executives. We're based in Atlanta and Nashville. I live in Georgia and from North Carolina. And Inflow Executives is more than a search firm, it's a solutions firm. So we help healthcare organizations address not only executive leadership gaps, but also challenges within their own existing leadership teams across the continuum through search, through leadership development, through other resource provisions, through consultants, et cetera. So that's really the work that I do, and just glad to be here. And I have a real keen interest in leadership development and work with organizations in that world, and I've had created training programs, which kind of drove me to try to be a better public speaker. So, Annette, that's me, and glad to be here.
No, I love that. And I know that your passion for leadership development. We've talked about that before. And, I want to say hello to people on LinkedIn, and we actually have couple of people joining us on Instagram as well. So I just wanted to say hello. If you do comment, share with us, we will be able to see it here in the studio and respond to you. So thanks again for being here. Now, of course, I know you from being in executive search, but I saw a post that you did not that long ago about being a stand-up comic. And, I wasn't really surprised having talked to you because I don't know, you kind of have this easygoing but humor, that I picked up immediately when I first met you on Clubhouse, because when you're not seeing people, it's all about what they say. So
Yeah.
I was a little surprised but not really shocked. And so if you can talk a little bit about kind of how you got started in that and the whole relationship between stand-up comedy and communication.
Yeah, great, absolutely. And it wasn't some kind of planned approach that I thought I would like to do stand up comedy. Several years ago in the 2000s, as I was continuing to develop the company that I had at the time, I sold in 2011. I realized that the leadership development work that I was doing was putting me in front of medium and large audiences. I was starting to land some speaking engagements, and I have a couple things kind of count against me a little bit, and when it comes to speaking on stage, is I have obviously, is anyone listening, have a very, very distinct regional North Carolina accent. But I also have a very severe hearing loss. I'm completely deaf in my right ear and partially deaf in my left. So there was always this, not necessarily fear about talking on stage or being on stage, but I wanted to be able to not be so contrived or so um, rehearsed. I didn't want
Mhm.
my presentations to be. I wanted to be able to do them from memory and just be free on stage or free in a classroom in terms of how I communicated. And so a couple different people recommended Toastmasters, which I think was great. I visited a couple Toastmasters, saying didn't feel like it was the right fit for me,
Mhm.
but a friend of mine recommended that I take an improv comedy class. And for those of you who don't know much about Charlotte, North Carolina from a comedy perspective, Charlotte's is a hotbed for comedians starting out. There's a comedy company there called Comedy Zone, the Comedy Zone, that managed comedy clubs all over the Southeast and really all over kind of the Midwest as well. And a lot of, professional comedians would come through there, and a lot of developing comedians were there. So I took this improv class, and I'll tell you, Annette, it was very difficult. I would recommend it to anybody that wants to be a better public speaker. But it was really hard for me, not be able to hear very well on stage,
Mhm.
be able to be really quick on my feet. I stuck it out though, and enjoyed it. I know the people in my class probably suffered for me being, just because I was not all that good at it. I was really terrible at it, to be honest with you. But there was a couple people in my class that were stand-up comedians who were taking improv class to improve their how they managed the stage and how they responded to crowd, did crowd work, etc. And they were going to an open mic where anybody that wants to try out comedy could go. And in Charlotte at the time, there was open mics everywhere. Like you could really go up if you were going to try to be a comedian. You could go up every night of the week, and then some nights on like Tuesdays or Wednesdays, you could go up 2 or 3 different times. It was just you show up at these clubs, sign up, and then they call your name, and you go up and do 5 minutes. So I went with them to watch this open mic, and I expected everybody to be funny. I expected everybody really good. I expected everybody to really like it just be like a whole bunch of professional comedians. It wasn't. It was, matter of fact, the professional comedians showed up late and would do their set and leave. But all the people early were like me. They were beginners in whatever they were doing, and in the net they were terrible. Like it was so bad. Like it was in my brain. I was like, I'm so much funnier than all of those people, and I just thought I got it's funny thing how you get encouraged. But I did. I got very excited. I'm like, you know what? I'm signing up for next week, and I signed up. And I said, I'm coming back next week. And the way it works is you have 5 minutes. They shine a flashlight in your eyes at 4 minutes to tell you only have 1 minute left. And at 5 minutes, they cut your mic off if you're not finished.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty pressure filled. And I had never done anything like that. So I show up, and I grew up around humor. My family, Southern humor, and I thought I could just tell a story and or talk. And most of my comedy is still very focused on self-deprecation and 100% clean. I stay away from anything that's outside of what would be considered a clean comedy.
Mhm.
And I bombed. It was terrible. It was probably the longest 5 minutes of my life. Literally no humor whatsoever seemed to have come out of my mouth because no one laughed. Like literally, there wasn't even like a chuckle. It was just complete silence. And this room was this bar was filled with people, and it was complete silence throughout. And I just but I kept going. I just kept going, and my 4 minutes came up, and I tried to get off stage as quickly as possible and walked to the back of the room through this sea of other people and got a few claps, good, and give it up for the new guy. When I got to the back of the room, the 2 guys that I'd come with were like, "Hey, good job. It's hard, first time, blah, blah, etc." And the guy sitting beside them said, "You are terrible." He said, "You were so bad." He goes, "You were terrible." And I'm like, "Well, thank you so much for your kindness of just sharing with me. I just saw how much I bombed. I get it." He goes, "No, you were really bad." I'm like, well, thanks a lot." And then he said, "But I like your style, and I like your voice. You just need to learn how to write." And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he invited me to a stand-up class. And I thought I failed so much at the other class that I would go why not give it a shot to see see what the differences were. And what I found out was there's so much difference between improv and stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy really is about the writing and how the words are put together and the themes of what you're talking about and what your voice is and etc. And when I realized that the class was really focused on the writing part and how to frame the message, then I began to think, I'm really on to something here as far as being a better public speaker. So
Mhm.
that's how it started. And so the whole class in that, and I don't want to just keep talking, but the whole class was focused on you learning how to write, learning what your voice was, what your perspective was going to be from, and you worked on creating a 5-minute graduation set, your first 5-minute set, and the whole class was teaching me how to write. And so when it was all said and done, and there was, I don't know, 35 people in the class, a couple people fell out. Then you have a graduation and everybody goes up. And it turns out I was selected to be like the number 2 person in the class. So got to stand up and do my bit. Again, not even thinking I was going to continue with comedy. It was just one of those, it was a learning experience for me. And it went so well that I ended up basically a lot for free at first, working part-time for free as an opening act MC for the Comedy Zone comedy chain. And
Mhm.
then, and that evolved into some paid gigs and I got into it. But what I learned from that was translating into my work as an executive recruiter and as a public speaker. There's some really key things around how stand-up comedy translates into being a good communicator. So that's how it all started.
Well, I absolutely love that, and it's interesting that you talk about the writing because I studied writing in school. I worked as a magazine writer, but different styles of writing are different. People, I think,
Mhm.
often mistakenly think, well, if I can write a blog post or I can write an article or something
Yeah,
that, yes, I can write a script or I can write for
yeah,
comedy. And,
yeah,
it really is very specialized and having that training. And I find that really interesting because I was not, I never really thought about it, although it's kind of like one of those things that it's obvious when somebody says something like, of
yeah,
course it's
yeah,
about the
exactly.
writing.
Yeah.
So
Well, go ahead.
no, please, please.
No, what I was going to say, for one of the first tenets of comedy and stand-up comedy is this phrase of get to the funny fast. Like when you get up on stage, you'll see, beginner comedians will come up on stage and they'll say stuff like, "How are y'all doing?" and "Good to be here." And well, that's cordial and nice, but it's not funny. And the
Mhm.
whole idea around comedy, stand-up comedy particularly, is around how many laughs per minute you can get from the audience. The more laughs per minute, the more pace you have, etc. And um, thinking about leaders communicating with their team, that was one of the things that I teach people when they're talking to a group, is to get to the point pretty quickly, get to what we're going to talk about pretty quickly. So instead of getting to the funny fast, get to the primary objective of what the presentation is about. So one of the things I did is kind of place value in, obviously you want to introduce yourself and introduce the background, et cetera. But one of the first things you can do as a communicator is establish what the conversation is going to be about immediately. So get to the point of what we're going to talk about. That way, everybody's locked in pretty quickly to what you're saying, and go from there. So that's the first step if you want to translate. And for example, one of the things we spent a lot of time on, was writing our introduction for the MC to give. And one of the things we found is the introduction needed also have a funny component to it. For me, my introduction is very simple. I grew up in Concord, North Carolina. My dad was retired from the military, did a whole bunch of different things. But my dad really, in his older years, was a greeter at Walmart. And he loved it. He loved being a greeter at Walmart. And he was such a good greeter at that particular Walmart that he was voted Greeter of the Year 4 times in the 5 years he was there. So my intro is the son of the 4-time Greeter of the Year at the Concord Walmart. And then my name, and it's kind of a silly thing, but it gets people like that's funny, right? That's just funny, right?
Yeah.
And just get to the point. And that's why introductions need about people don't need to be a page. They need to be, here's what this person's background is. Here's where their point of authority is coming from, or why they're an expert in the topic, and then get right to the point. So that's the first thing that we learned from comedy that I translate in how I do presentations.
No, I love that. And I have heard that from a couple of, because I follow a lot of people that I learned from. There's so many smart people on LinkedIn, TikTok, and everywhere. And,
Yeah.
I was always of the mind too, that if I do a presentation to come out and say, hi, I'm Annette, I'm so happy to be here, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And now when I do that, I come out and I say something about, people think of LinkedIn as network, as making
Yeah.
connections, but it's really this 24/7 party or something before I start talking about myself. But that's something. And it's, as I'm listening to you talking, I'm like, man, I got to get into one of those classes, because
Yeah.
I think it would, I would also really, really, enjoy it, as well as making me a better presenter. And I tried Toastmasters as well, and I also felt like I don't know, that it just wasn't quite for me. It was very structured, and when was looking for something, or thinking about something to be a little bit more looser. And
Yeah.
and we were talking a little bit before we went live about the idea
Yeah.
of doing improv, because I've had people,
Yeah.
communication coaches, recommend that, because it can help you kind of think on your feet. But I
Yeah.
find it really interesting, because I had always thought, before our conversation actually,
Yeah.
that improv is comedy, and and that they're kind of interchangeable, and yet, as you say, they're really totally different animals.
Yeah, they're totally different. Now, there's great value in improv, and even though I was terrible at it, I learned a great deal, like how to communicate with others, how to build onto their topics. There's a game called Yes and, where someone says something on a particular topic, and you say yes, and then you add to it, and I think that's a real valuable way, particularly in if you're leading a workshop and it's highly interactive. That's a great. And there was other skills that I learned from improv, but to stand up, because it was so focused on making it look like you were making the stuff up all as you go, but it was very practiced. It was very um, it really helped you from that perspective. So the second thing that we learned is your first joke, your first real joke, or your first real punchline needs to be the second funniest thing you say all night of that set. Because again, it's all about getting your audience completely engaged into, okay, here's where we're going. Now let's go there. And so one of the things that once when I do my presentations on any of the topics that I talk about, be it gratitude, be it leadership, be it accomplishment, culture stuff that I work on, the second point that I make after is I want it to be pretty poignant. I want it to be something to make people think. I want to draw them immediately into the conversation. And so that's really important. That's another aspect of comedy that I translate into my personal, business presentations. Is I want to, again, it's all about bringing the audience into your world. If it's the topic you're talking about, bring them into your world. And this is where not being boring really is helpful, because you'll lose them quick. You lose an audience fast. Today's attention span's unbelievable. How quick people are, like, they're already looking, doing something else.
Yeah. I've heard it was a like goldfish, and then I heard recently now it's like a gnat or something like that. But I would imagine that that type of training to sort of veer a little bit into that is very valuable, because if you're in leadership at a company or aspire to
Um,
it, being able to, speak and have people engaged, has got to be extremely important.
yeah, it was, and then and the third thing that really came out of doing stand up, and by the way, I worked part time for several years at the clubs as an opener and as a feature. I did some corporate comedy along the way, still do a little bit of that. And I still probably do one or two shows a year. With my business, it's hard to, that's a hard life to try to be a professional comedian, like, or true professional comedian. I tend to be a hobbyist at it, but I mean, I get paid when I go on stage, which helps, that makes it a little bit better. But it's a hard life. But what the third thing that really came out of it was, it, because I wrote and write my comedy from my perspective, from how I see life, how things that I went through, or my family, or how I grew up, or the culture that I grew up in, or whatever it might be. I became even more, I guess, secure in that, secure in the fact that I am from the Appalachian region of America, and that I do have a thick accent. And even though I've been in executive search for 32 years and spoke to boards and large conferences, I'm actually going to be a keynote to a large nursing organization in the fall. Um, the comedy, being in comedy, made me more comfortable in my own skin. And I think, for people who are, maybe a little bit nervous about being genuine or trying to be, something that they're not, stand up comedy is a great way to express who you are as a person. Again, my comedy is focused on clean comedy, and that's, and that is just where, my core values are.
Mhm, mhm,
So I take that. It also makes me, or helps me, like, to be not, and I don't, and by the way, I don't step on a stage and try to be funny with my presentations. It's not like I think I need to tell jokes on stage when I'm talking about how gratitude can change behavior, or how leadership that's focused on managing micro accomplishments is of value in subordinates, etc. I don't deliberately try to be funny. I think people, it's, that comes off as contrived, right? It
mhm.
comes off as, you're trying too hard. Uh, doing stand up really helped me be more comfortable with that. And the other thing about stand up that relates is that stand up is not really, for the most part, most stand up comedians are not telling jokes. Like, they're not
Mhm,
telling like
mhm.
a joke, right? Like, two people walked into a bar, whatever it is, or,
Yeah.
they're not telling jokes. They're talking about things that they observe. One of my favorite comedians, a guy named Brian Regan. And Brian Regan is a lot of comedians' favorite comedian. Brian Regan talks about just normal stuff. And you're like, well, how's that funny? He finds the humor in it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I really like that about Brian. And he's a professional comedian. He fills out arenas. Like, he's amazingly funny. Um, there's a comedian right now that's really hot called Nate Bargatze from Nashville. Nate is also talking about his life, like how he lives, his family, his growing up, and he looks like a soccer dad up there, and it's hilarious. So it's just so funny. It's funny. So how does that make, uh, one of the how does that translate into the work that I do in terms of presentation? It just gives me a natural focus on that, and my comedy is really self-deprecation. I'm usually the butt of the joke, right?
Mhm.
And again, once they say if you laugh at yourself, you're okay. Like, right, you're okay. So how does that help in terms of being a leader? It makes you transparent. It makes you, in my mind, it makes you transparent. So that's where that was really important. And storytelling is also a key piece of it. But that's the third thing I learned from being a stand-up comedian.
Well, I love that. I prefer, I guess, what you were what it would be identified as clean comedy. I'm not, having been a bartender for years, I'm not offended by foul language, but sometimes I feel when comedians use it, they use it to get the laugh, but it might even be like the nervous laugh, like they just use it to get the laugh because what they're saying, what they're doing is not all that humorous. And um I did see a comedian many years ago who was a joke comedian. That was like his thing. It was like
Yeah,
Jack the Joke
yeah,
Guy or something like that. And it was the most boring show that I ever saw. I mean, I just thought it was just, not funny. And I think that for me, if I'm watching someone, the comedy, it's if it's relatable, something that, oh yeah, I've been there, or
yeah.
because things are so universal. So I just want to say hello to some of the people in our audience. Elizabeth Walker says hello. Thank you for
Hey,
joining
Elizabeth.
us. And my friend Jillian Whitney joining us from sunny Las
Yeah.
Vegas. Lovely to have you here, Jillian. And here is a Marion fan delivered one of the
Hey,
best
Chelsea.
keynotes I experienced in 2023.
Thank you.
The,
Very
the
kind.
message on gratitude and leadership still resonated, storytelling and great research. If improv is part of that magic, sign me up, from Virginia. And I like to read the comments
Thank you,
because
Chelsea.
this will
Yeah.
be on my podcast and people won't be able to see them on the screen.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chelsea. And I really do appreciate the kind words. And I think that the art of storytelling and being comfortable on stage, and then and to her point, thank you, Chelsea. It's very kind of you. I that was one of my favorite presentations I did all last year, around gratitude. Is you can be funny, you can have great stories, but you have to back it up with the research and the conviction, and so that's another thing that I learned in comedy school was you have to write with conviction, and that conviction comes from being comfortable with the topic or comfortable with the with the message that you're trying to present. So in the case of what she's talking about is the authentic gratitude training. There was a couple years of pretty deep research, review related to that training. Excuse me. And that training is around how to change behaviors using gratitude, and we teach leadership, professionals how to do that. But back to the comedy piece of it, the last component of that is one of the other things is that they teach you in comedy is putting the words in a particular order so that the funny word is the last word in the phrase of the punchline. So a master of that is Jerry Seinfeld. I'm not a huge fan of his comedy, but I'm a huge fan of how he puts his comedy together. And he writes, um, still to this day, I've seen some videos on it. He literally writes out the story that is the funny story, and then he works on eliminating the amount of the words so that one, he gets to the funny fast, two, he's making the point, which we talked about, but three, is he making the point that's going to have the funniest? Um, the last part he says is going to be the funniest thing. Well, how does that fit within? How does that fit within being a presenter with a keynote or a leadership training or what, or with your team making a presentation? Thinking about the most important point. Remember, I said the first joke has to be the second funniest. Well, that's where the key point needs to be made. Closing strong at the end of the meeting or end of the presentation is absolutely vital to that message being received, that message being acted on, that message being fully grasped by the audience. So, really taking the time to think about what the last thing you're going to say is, you know, and you may go into Q&A or whatever, but closing strong is really important. And you could take that framework for even a short presentation is get to the point fast, make sure that the first point that you make is the topic that you're trying to address. Fill the middle of it with supported research and sharing that information through storytelling, however, and then closing strong. That's how you, in my mind, how you make the biggest impression and that your message is received. So that's what I learned in comedy school.
Well, it's like that because, I studied film and everything in college, and it's
Yeah.
like that with film. It's like that with a dinner at a restaurant, that you want to finish because that people remember. That's what people remember at the end. So I am sharing your LinkedIn profile here.
Yeah.
And are you open to connecting with people on
Yeah.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, please. I'm in creator mode, so your first option is to follow, but I prefer that you send me a connect request. So just use that down arrow.
The more, click on
Yeah,
more.
you click on more and send me a connect request. I'd rather bring you into my network and join you in your network. And yeah, please. And I post a lot of content about leadership. I post a lot of content about the gratitude framework, and obviously, my work in the executive search space. I just got recently a badge for top executive coach, but on LinkedIn, one of those badges. My executive coaching really comes in the content of I coach the people that I place with the companies that I work with. So that's where it comes from, or team coaching. So, but yeah, please reach out, connect with me, send me that connect request. Love to have a dialogue with you and learn how to support your networking efforts as well.
And also if you do connect with Marion, you will get to see some photos of his beautiful dogs.
Yeah, I post way too many dog pictures, but
No, never
yeah,
too many. We're both dog lovers here. So one of the things that I like to ask
yeah,
everyone who comes on my show is for some kind of final thought. Now, I've asked you a few questions. You've shared a lot of information. Thank you so much for that. But is there anything that you'd like to share that you think would be important for people to know, sort of to maybe round this up?
yeah, great question. I think the biggest thing is I think a lot of people probably think they have some reason that they're not a good communicator, right? They may not be able to get their message across, or they feel they don't like public speaking, or they don't like being in front of audience. But we have to do it every day, regardless of how we feel. In our world of business today, it may be on Zoom, it may be in person. So think about taking a comedy class. Think about it taking an improv class. Think about starting to write about what you want to talk about and practice, like getting to the point fast. But don't be afraid of it. Like failure in that regard is not that big a deal. You might be embarrassed. I was, like I said at the beginning of this thing, I'd literally my first time on stage doing stand up, literally zero laughs, none. And I walked off stage, a bit embarrassed, but it made me want to go back and do it again. So the thing is I would encourage anybody watching or listening to the podcast, don't be afraid. Just go do it. Like, go give it a shot. And most cities have good stand-up comedy classes all over. I know Atlanta does and Chicago does, and there's a lot of classes out there. And kind of go around and check it out, or consider Toastmasters, or consider improv. And but to the points that we made. Sorry for the long answer to your short question, Annette.
No, I love that. I love that. And even if there isn't anything local, I think you can even find things online.
Yep.
If you just don't have anything local. Well, Marion, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing this story with me and people listening, because I think it's so important to people to step out of their comfort zone, right?
Yep.
So again, thank you so much. It was such a treat to have you here with me.
Thank you, Annette.
Everyone else, have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Thanks for being here.